It's time for Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla. Stay tuned for insights, impact, and inspiration right here on Channel Africa. Available on the Channel Africa app. Tsepiso Makwetla winds it down on Africa World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
Africa World Hour, it's a very good evening to you and a warm welcome to our Thursday edition on this Thursday, the 19th of March, 2026. Welcome to it. I am Tsepiso Makwetla. This is Channel Africa, the African perspective. Stay connected to Africa and the world with Channel Africa, the international voice of the South African Broadcasting Corporation. And remember, you can watch us, stream us live on our various social media platforms, and you can also reach out to us, share your views on some of the stories that we're carrying today. Let's start with some of our top stories this hour.
It's time for Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla. Stay tuned for insights, impact, and inspiration right here on Channel Africa. Available on the Channel Africa app.
We start in Botswana, where the president, Dumaboko, wants to strengthen his country's trade relations with Namibia and Angola. To this end, Boko has embarked on an official visit to Luanda, where he met with President João Lourenço today, before heading to Namibia to meet with President Netumbo Nandi-Ndaitwah tomorrow. Kailihle Khumalo has the details.
The office of Botswana President Duma Boko says these visits in Angola and Namibia are aimed at boosting trade and investment. This will offer the leaders a chance to look at ways to strengthen cooperation in the mining and energy sectors. Botswana also cooperates with the two countries in a number of areas such as water resource management, tourism, and conservation. The three countries are members of Kavango Zambezi Transfrontier Conservation Area alongside Zambia and Zimbabwe.
The Mozambican Navy is accused of killing at least 13 fishermen at the weekend as the military intensifies its long-running war on insurgency. Locals say forces targeted 14 boats near the port town of Mosambua de Praia. The BBC's Shingai Nyoka has those details.
Witnesses described scenes of panic as Navy forces allegedly opened fire on fishing boats early Sunday. At least 13 people were reportedly killed and several others injured as they tried to flee the gunfire. Neither the government nor the military have confirmed the incident. At least 2 similar attacks on civilians involving naval forces were recorded last year, according to a local human rights group. Mozambique's military has battled militants in the oil-rich province of Cabo Delgado since 2017.
The Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda have agreed to a series of coordinated steps to de-escalate tensions and advance progress on the ground. This is according to a joint statement by the United States, the DRC and Rwanda. It was released by the United States State Department. The announcement comes just days after senior officials from the two countries, African countries, met to revive the stalled peace process in the eastern DRC. DRC political analyst Didier Bayeye says the U.S. involvement has long been questioned.
I don't think at this stage there is still a doubt about whether there is a Rwandan troop in the DRC or not, because evidence have been produced. The M23 is not a loyal army. The weapon they are using are registered under Rwandan Defense Force. That is why you see every time there is peace agreement, there is no M23 coming on the table, but instead there is Rwanda. So if Rwanda is not involved, why is he always present in the peace agreement? Why is he always traveling as far as to the US to go sign the peace agreement? Then if he's innocent and doesn't recognize anything.
In other news, the U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth insists that Washington is on track in the ongoing war in Iran. Hegseth also used the opportunity to again criticize traditional U.S. allies, accusing them of lukewarm support for the war aims.
We've damaged or sunk over 120 of their Navy ships, with battle damage assessments pending for many more. Their surface fleet is no longer a factor. Their submarines, they once had 11, are gone. Their military ports are crippled.
And finally, the United Nations says almost 1,000 human rights activists were murdered in Colombia. Between 2016 and 2025, there has been a rise in violence against these individuals from criminal groups linked to drug trafficking, illegal mining, and human trafficking. The BBC's Mimi Swabi has the details.
Since 2016, the year of the peace agreement with the former FARC guerrilla group, there has been a gradual rise in the number of killings. This is primarily due to conflicts involving armed criminal groups in areas previously controlled by the FARC, where the government has struggled to establish a presence. More than 70% of the perpetrators were assessed as non-state armed actors. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, says Colombia remains one of the deadliest countries to be a human rights defender. Rights groups have called for urgent action and have previously criticised the government for not responding adequately to the dangers activists face.
1 hour, one continent, one voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
And it is 9:08. You know that we have been counting down less than a week before Channel Africa, together with the Wits Business School, come together to launch the first of its kind for the station, Africa Matters Summit. Panel discussions with experts and researchers arguing for Africa to thrive under challenges of climate change. The summit will take place in Johannesburg, South Africa, under the theme Financing Africa's Recovery. To talk to us about the significance of such a summit is CEO at the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Alan Mukoki.
I think that it's a very important initiative. As you'd appreciate, we as the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry are, I think, charged with the idea of ensuring that investment, trade and investment is going to be the central pillar of what we're able to do in not only South Africa, but the rest of the continent as well. We have an opportunity, This is going to be a place that is one of the most investable continents in the world over the coming years, and we did not fail. So we are going to always join up with any of the people who are the protagonists who are trying to put up platforms and templates for any of the areas that we believe are very important to drive economic development and alleviate all the issues relating to poverty, inequality, and unemployment. I think the most important thing is that climate change is sometimes, not always, is sometimes a consequence of something else. But more than anything else, it means that you have to have the infrastructure, because the devastation of what climate change can actually do, let's say maybe one area being floods, it means you are in an even far worse situation if you don't even have the infrastructure, because the infrastructure is the one thing that can give you the risk mitigation around how to protect communities, how to protect business industry. Because if you have those bridges, you have those dams and channels, you are able to lessen the impact of what might possibly happen. That's very, very important. There are things, of course, that you're not always going to be able to protect against, but luckily in Africa, we have not necessarily always been susceptible to things like earthquakes. But even in that particular environment, it would then mean you got to learn from people like Japan in terms of how to make the kinds of buildings that, if we were susceptible to that would resist and sustain that level of damage. But I think that in the context of Africa generally, what you probably would see is things relating to weather in terms of inclement, whether it's going to be droughts, whether it's going to be sustained levels of floods. But those are the two major ones that are very immediate in respect of how you deal with that. And for that, infrastructure is one of the elements. And the second one is quite clearly technology and educated skills and competences in terms of knowing how to build those levels of resistance and those pillars and verticals in terms of what do we do when this actually happens, and what are the areas from a planning point of view that are most likely going to be creating those level of vulnerabilities. Where do we build these cities? Around what fault lines do we actually do that? So there's a lot of work that definitely needs to happen. And I think that in all, we have not been as devastated, but that does not necessarily mean this is not actually going to happen.
And that there is CEO at the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Alan Mokoki, speaking to Rise and Shine's Asanda Bet. And of course, it's a very important discussion, as he says. Research shows that up to 7 to 15% of GDP is lost as a result of climate risk. And the question that we are asking is, who must fund Africa's recovery? Some must say, you know what, it's kind of obvious, especially if you look at Agenda 2063. This is what African countries have committed themselves to. So we'll be looking at the various ways in which Africa can do this, and also how to balance the scale with the worst emitting countries, and that is the richer countries, the Northern Hemisphere countries. That is Africa Matters on the 25th of March 2026. That's next week, Wednesday. Do join us. That's at the Donald Gordon's Institute at Wits Business School. The Nigerian army says it has foiled a coordinated assault by Islamic State West Africa Province, ISWAP, on a military base in Malam Fatori, Borno State on the 18th of March. That was yesterday, reportedly killing at least 80 fighters. Well, this reflects a significant operational success. Analysts note that the broader security situation remains volatile, with insurgents concurrently launching deadly suicide bombings in the Maiduguri and district and overrunning other bases in the region. To speak more about this is global security consultant and criminologist Dr. Diyeli Aibe. Very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us, Dr. Aibe.
Thank you very much. Such a sweet voice. It's a great privilege listening to your voice live
Wow,
on
wow.
radio.
I think many would argue with you. This is my flu voice, but thank you for the encouragement. Dr. Iber, is it a fair comment to say that this is a huge operational success? And I'm saying that given the backdrop of the number of offensives that have been launched against communities, especially in the Borno state.
Yes, we never expect. I don't know if you're aware. There was on Monday precisely, and there was an attack in the about 3 centimeters attack in the use of ICD provides explosive device. To attack most of the populated areas in Borno State, in Makodi itself, Maduguri itself, and people were killed during the day towards the Ramadan break fasting, and people went to the market, were killed, and in the teaching hospital too were killed simultaneously. So it's so sad that the military is not reacting now. It's proactive, they were to, assuming they were very, very proactive, they were able to mitigate that attack, and that sent the wrong signal. And the president, who is on the state visit to Britain, has given an order that all these commanders should go to Maiduguri to give that order to. There was this order he gave that they should move down to Maiduguri to mitigate that crisis. So maybe they are responding to the president's order now, responding to it. But I don't see that as being reactive now, because lives have been lost there. Innocent Nigerians were lost, and it was they target the vulnerable spots of the populace, of the civilians, And this is the Ramadan, the end of Ramadan now, and that part of the region is very religious, and they took advantage of that vulnerability to strike, and lives were lost. And when I look at the footage of those who were killed, it was very horrific. And you can't just behold that these are human beings, So the military are just being reactive now, instead of being proactive now. So it's so sad, but it's a good one for the military, trying to boost the morals of that the military is up to the task to mitigate this, and at this point they will not. But this jihadist group are getting external support. So we talked about intelligence collaboration, and the DS is one of those agencies in Nigeria that are very good in terms of intelligence gathering. But I think they should be able to work together to form that synergy to help the law enforcement agency. But there's battle fatigue in the military now. They're strained our law enforcement agency, the military now. So I think they should form that synergy. It's part of the action plans of trying to mitigate the terror group. We talk about intelligence collaboration in agency and strategic communication. So maybe they're keen to that now. They should be able to follow that through that line of rule of engagement, of forming that strategic communications, not just leak out information like that, and let it be strategic, and let it be able to boost the morals of Nigerians, that the militaries are up to the task to mitigate this insurgent group. But we talked about it previously, that we need stakeholder engagement. Just use the military kinetic approach alone. Non-kinetic approach to go a long way. The stakeholders engagement, community engagement, it will go a long way. Of a traditional ruler should be involved in this to mitigate this, and it will really go a long way. Usually just using military approach alone, because battle fatigue will come in, and lives of soldiers will be. But we can see now that the bandits or the insurgent group are very audacious in their act and using technology, and they're very, very proactive in their intelligence gathering. You can see how they will to use the IEDs and using women as suicide bombers. In number of expected especially in Africans, especially Nigerians, that they think have this narrative or this perception that Nigerians are fearful, and that they are using women now. We not suspect them using as a suicide bomber to kill people, and they could see the effect now. Is happening now.
And I want to ask, what is the litmus test of the superiority of not only the intelligence gathering, but in terms of the military tactics and might of these insurgent groups? While the army claimed victory in Malam Fatori, the reports indicate that to the 80 that they claimed to kill, 65 soldiers were also killed.
So it's so sad. You can see the numbers too. It's almost proportionate with what the killings of the insurgents. So imagine 65 soldiers of well-trained officers through the money resources have gone down the drain for that. I just hope they will give them give them a befitting burial, and their dues and if insurance cover will be paid as swiftly as possible, so to mobilize, to motivate the other soldiers to work. Because if they discover that most of their colleagues are not no, they're not giving a befitting burial, and their pension or their gratuity or maybe their insurance cover is not being paid, it will demoralize them. So it's so sad. And we talked about technology will help us a lot, because we have one of the advantages in Nigerian military house is the airways, the Air Force. Can use the Air Force to be able to smoke out all these people. But I know the reluctance of the government and the ability to turn intention into action has been very dismal. And if not the president giving that order, I think most of them, they will be fit dragging in going to that region to fight that insurgency. So I think we should use technology to block our borderline. Our borderline is very porous. And because we have this joint tax that has been, there's this breakaway of this joint tax force, regional tax force within Chad, Cameroon, and Mali, and because of the military rules in Mali and Burkina Faso and other some part of West African region, that accord, that joint tax force has been dismantled, and is giving these bandit audacious acts to come in and the guerrilla warfare, to attack and return back to base. And I think if we can be able to smoke them out, use non-kinetic approach, deconstruct the minds of the clergies are very powerful tools you can use there to construct the minds of the people. Just using military force alone and just spending money on that. So it's a very long way of helping the law collaborating civil military relationship within the stakeholder with community engagement. It's a very long way of helping.
Let's talk money and how it's used, because the army attributed the air support for its success, and I'm just wondering, is it as a result of the arrival of that 100 US troops who are in Nigeria for technical support, but also most importantly, strategically, how does this work? This is the same country that has threatened to bomb Nigeria because of what it sees as religious killings. So when you sit down, I know they say my enemy's friend is my friend, but how does it work? Do you trust the intelligence that you're getting and also the strategy?
Look, the president was very, very strategic in order to be on the side of Donald Trump. Donald Trump can be very erratic. You cannot predict his behavior. And the government were very strategic, and instead of playing politics, they were now, because they didn't want to escalate it to under his watch, the military attack Nigeria, one of the giants of Africa. Military force is one of the best in Africa. And making America, if they have escalated it or normally that crisis, well, American would have just been what is in Iran he's facing now, and should be a bad image to the president. He's going for re-election in 2027, so he knows the opposition parties, opposition leaders will use that against him. That under his watch, we have military mission, and that has both the bandits now or the soldiers. It's as if seeing America as the Christian country coming to attack a Muslim country. The response of this Israeli and American attack on Iran, there was mass protest in Abuja and some other part of the northern region, respond to that. So maybe that response is making the insurgent group now tend to be very audacious and trying to angry them, embolden them to attack, because they have an insider threat already. So, but I want to applaud the Tinubu government too, because they know if they don't get it right, they have to placate the president, American president, that no, this is not where everybody is being killed. Let us collaborate. So probably pointing fingers, and you could see the effect of it. So the American government had to see reason with it. There could be American president is a good negotiator too. Maybe there's something that negotiate. Okay, I don't want to. Buhari is a political winning machine. You don't like Hugo Chavez of Venezuela. Okay. He knows how to do a politics, a part of politics. So he was able to say, okay, he knows Donald Trump has the interest in Nigeria. It's okay, what do you want? And don't talk about Christian genocide. Now let's talk about collaboration now.
All right,
just you can see the effect now.
Let's round off and talk about.
We're talking about that now. He's talking, okay, let us work together and solve the problem. So the president was very strategic about it, and able to manage it well, so they do not. The opposition will not keen to that and make the government look weak and vulnerable.
Okay, so let's round off and very briefly, please. President Tinubu in the UK at the moment, you spoke about the funding of the insurgents, and I want to look at, tit for tat, so to speak, what is available in terms of military hardware on both sides. Do you think President Tinubu might look to the UK for some, aid package just in terms of military reinforcement to fight the insurgency, given the fact that they are talking about improving trade, and you can't have a booming economy with the level of insecurity that Nigeria has at the moment?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, that's what is trending now. Just latest security situation in Nigeria now, and the President Tinubu is in UK now, talking with the King Charles, and part of it is our security from that collaboration. He knows the importance of it because the election is coming 2027. If he doesn't get that right, people don't want to come up. There's an apathy of people coming to vote, and you don't want to raise a signal to the government. So it's part of his agenda now with the UK. I'm applauding for that. Not just go there for pleasure and panditry, but he's trying to look at, no, you cannot think of election when there is insecurity, and the opposition can cling to that, and it can escalate. And so he's very careful about. So it's one of these point of agenda there in the UK to forward that collaboration. We need that. We cannot do that alone, but we have the personnel. But we know that in security, you consider European allies, the EU, the NATO. And in spite of American might, they still have to form that synergy with the Europeans, with NATO, to form that synergy. Even Russia too. Because you cannot isolate yourself in international security matters. You have that collaboration, and that's what the president is trying to do now. So I want to applaud him for that taking that bull by the horn. And people are watching, and he needs to get it right because 2027 Nigeria is standing for the election period.
We're going to have to end it here, I'm afraid, Dr. Aibe. Dr. Dieli Aibe is a global security consultant and criminologist, just talking to us about Nigeria's military operation in warding off insurgents. We've been looking at the northeastern part of Nigeria, but of course this is all over the country, and the Nigerian president on an overseas trip to the UK, and he has been in talks with US President Donald Trump. Brings the time to 5 minutes past 9.
Across Africa, communities rise with the promise of clean water and clean sanitation. The African Union's 2026 theme calls us to action.
It's about mobilizing real commitments, securing climate-resilient water and sanitation projects, and ensuring that water becomes a driver of sustainable development and prosperity across the continent.
A landmark moment, not only for Africa, but for the global movement for access to safe water for all.
Assuring sustainable water availability for every home, every village, every nation. This is the Africa we want.
Channel Africa, the African perspective.
At the forefront, the most pressing issues on Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla.
Channel Africa.
The price of Brent crude oil remains volatile as a result of the war in the Middle East, surging to around $109 a barrel. Iran's Revolution's Guard have threatened to target oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and Qatar this after Israel attacked the world's largest natural gas field in the Persian Gulf, which is shared between Iran and Qatar. The latest escalation targeting energy infrastructure in the region has heightened concerns around the world as energy costs surge. Iran has also confirmed attacks at its own oil facilities at Asaluye in the southwest region of the country. Shimon Bryce Peace has more.
What's clear is that the targeting of energy facilities in the region will compound the supply disruptions being experienced amid reduced tanker and cargo traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. Some forecasts see the price of Brent crude oil reaching $120 a barrel in the coming days amid continued disruptions. Iran's Tasnim news agency indicates that the Revolutionary Guard would target various refineries, a gas field, and petrochemical complexes in neighboring Gulf states, calling them legitimate and prime targets for counterattacks. As the UN's World Food Programme warns that the war could cause the worst disruptions to humanitarian work since the COVID-19 pandemic. Listen to WFP's Deputy Executive Director Carl Scow.
Our supply chains may really be on the brink of the most severe disruption since COVID and the Ukraine war back in 2022. Our shipments of life-saving food are being affected by the squeeze on trade. It is taking us longer to deliver by sea, and our costs have increased. Our shipping costs are up 18% so far, and we have thousands of trucks on the roads every day, and these are now running on much more expensive fuel due to the oil prices. Higher costs mean that we can buy less food or provide less cash to beneficiaries.
With some of the world's most vulnerable regions of particular concern, with the agency warning that the war could push millions of people into acute hunger by June.
The spike in global food and fuel costs could leave millions of families priced out of stable foods, particularly in import-dependent countries like sub-Saharan Africa and Asia. In fact, our analysis projects that if the Middle East conflict continues through June, an additional 45 million people could be pushed into acute hunger by price rises. This would take global hunger levels to an all-time record, and it's a terrible, terrible prospect. We have been forced to cut life-saving food rations for people in famine conditions in Sudan. We are only able to support 1 in 4 acutely malnourished children in Afghanistan, which is now the world's worst malnutrition crisis.
This as the US administration moved to loosen sanctions on the sale of Venezuelan oil in an effort to ease market pressures and energy prices. US companies would now be allowed, with some limitations, to do business with Venezuela's state-owned oil and gas company as part of efforts to boost global oil supplies. I'm Sherman Bryce-Pease in New York.
1 hour, 1 continent, 1 voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
2 presidential commissions in Tanzania have recommended the continuation of mass evictions of Maasai communities from key conservation areas, including the Ngorongoro Conservation Area. The move comes despite global criticism and ongoing resistance from the Maasai, who have long lived on and relied on these ancestral lands. Human rights groups, including Survival International, have strongly condemned the recommendations, warning that they threaten both the rights and livelihoods of indigenous communities. And for more on this, we're joined by Linda Pope from Survival International. And a very good evening to you, and please do correct my pronunciation of your surname. What brought about even, looking at such a recommendation? I know it has been a rather controversial issue for quite a while, not only in Tanzania, we've seen it in Uganda and Kenya as well. But let's look at Tanzania's own background.
Indeed. It's quite a terrible situation, which has been going on for quite a while. It's good to be here. Thank you for having me. Survival has worked with the Maasai for a long time, and in recent years, the situation has really escalated. There were massive protests of Maasai in 2024 against evictions from, you already mentioned Ngorongoro, for example, or the evictions in Loliondo also made world headlines. And following these protests and international and national criticism, the president has established these 2 presidential commissions, which have been, so to say, investigating the situation. And they now presented their findings, which are terrible, to be honest. They negate all the problems with the evictions. They advocate for more evictions. So they're actually, opening the path for mass evictions of Maasai from their ancestral lands in some of the most famous conservation areas the world knows, and all of this is Maasai land.
And this is what I'm wondering, because the globe over, there has been a drive to conserve these lands and the peoples of it, and including legislation that has been enacted that nothing must be done to endanger it and its populace. So what is the rationale behind what Tanzania is doing? What are they saying? Because I know that they've also been accusing NGOs of spreading misinformation.
Well, they claim they do this for conservation, but there is no way that this can be done for conservation. Everything we know about conservation and indigenous peoples, including the Maasai and their cattle herding, says that indigenous ownership of lands is the best way to conserve lands. And the Maasai are saying that themselves. They've provided lots of proof. They have developed their own conservation vision. All of this is entirely ignored by the government and the president. And they're claiming that this is necessary, which is just not true. There are other interests behind this. For example, tourism, which is a big thing in these areas that we're now talking about, in Ngorongoro, for example. And a lot of tourists apparently don't want to see cattle and Maasai. And the government also wants to cash in on more exclusive tourist reserves on Maasai land. So I think that is a big thing, even though they do claim this is for conservation. And we know that a lot of conservationists do say that people and nature can't go together, but this is really their colonial ideas of conservation and the separation of humans and nature, and has nothing to do with indigenous land management as the Maasai are doing this, and has nothing to do with everything that science now also tells us about indigenous guardianship.
And which is very strange because the very history and heritage of African people is that of an ecosystem that has evolved and blended well over years, even with population growth between, man, animals, and fauna. So are they using any scientific studies to, bolster their arguments, or is it just a PR exercise? Because we know that the Maasai have coexisted with wildlife and fauna for centuries.
Exactly, that's what they've done. Well, the government is really using a very old racist and colonial narrative about population growth. They're saying there's just too many Maasai and too many cattle, which really isn't the issue for conservation and climate. We know that it's not necessarily the Maasai that have, for example, the biggest carbon footprint or the biggest impact on the environment. But for example, in the Ngorongoro conservation area, tourism is a major factor, which is, bad for the availability of water. There are roads, there are, tourist cars going into these areas all the time. It's a massive industry, which apparently the government doesn't see as a problem, whereas the Maasai who are living off this land, the land is key to their survival and key to their identity. They're being blamed for natural destruction, for destruction of these areas, which is absolutely, it's just fabricated. And these commissions are also fabricating reasons now for evicting Maasai.
And, as you're talking, and I'm thinking of if one needs a practical example of how that tourism drive has actually completely decimated what used to be natural land, one needs only look at Zanzibar, particularly Stone Town, how that spread incrementally even onto the beaches, so that there could be these tourist exercises, and the Maasai were forced to, they were caricatured really, they're just to earn money. So has the government thought of thinking outside of the box, of seeing how, if there is to be relocation, how they can do it in such a way that they still maintain the indigenous knowledge systems and, apply them to other parts of the country?
Well, we have to be very clear that the Maasai, they have land rights and they need a livelihood, and this is their land. So there's really not much that the government can do other than respecting the lands if it wants to comply to human rights law and international standards. And that's what it should be doing. And I think if you do that, you can also have conservation. It's everything. We see that in all the places. I mean, Ngorongoro isn't beautiful despite the Maasai. It is beautiful because of the Maasai, because they have catered for this environment. That's why it's really clear that the government is either not understanding conservation or is just fabricating these reasons in order to boost tourism and evict the Maasai from their land. So there's really, in terms of conservation, you can't really explain why this is happening other than really these stereotypes about Maasai and their land, which have been around since colonial times. I'm German. I know the German colonial stereotypes that came up about the Maasai and the protection of Ngorongoro, for example. So it's really these old stories that they're now using to evict and to threaten the livelihood of the Maasai. And it's really a terrible situation. We have seen violent evictions in 2022 in Loliondo, which were really terrible. We've really seen attempts to push out the Maasai from Ngorongoro by cutting social services and healthcare. People are not being treated. For example, pregnant women can't, go to the hospital because there's no infrastructure provided. All the infrastructure that was there is being demolished. So the government is really trying everything it can to push the Maasai out of their land.
And one is not saying one or to ignore the land rights and heritage of the Maasai, but government in 2022 launched the so-called voluntary relocation, and I remember that very well, that there were protests that became violent only because the Maasai were accused of agitating, and I know some of them lost their lives as a result of that. But what I'm asking is there a constructive way of doing that, of making sure that the Maasai who do possibly want to move get their fair share of proceeds from those land rights, etc.?
Well, I guess the government has already tried to get some people to move, and the ones that agree, they have moved, but the other ones haven't. And they're quite strong in their position to, this being voluntary relocations. There was also a statement, I think just today or yesterday, from a Maasai Alliance who have said that they're not ready to move. They object the idea of this being voluntary relocations, and they want their land rights to be recognized. I think the process, the way it is going now, it has nothing to do with voluntary. As I said, for example, the social services in Ngorongoro have been cut, and this is not a situation where the Maasai can have a discussion with the government about what is happening in the Ngorongoro conservation area or on their lands, because they're really being mistreated in many different ways, and lies are being told about them in public by high government officials. It's really a very difficult situation, and at the moment it's really hard to see how this can change. The government needs to stop its attempts to blame the Maasai for environmental destruction. It needs to stop its attempts to evict Maasai, and it also needs to return areas such as Loliondo, where the Maasai were evicted, and just 3 years ago. Really not that long ago.
All right, Linda, thank you so much for speaking to us, and of course we will make sure that we invite the Maasai to speak to us to also understand what has been happening with this process. Linda Pop is from Survival International, and of course land is a huge issue on the African continent. Land grabs and reparations when it comes to those that people are still, even in South Africa, people are still looking to own the deeds to land that they've lived on for centuries. So I will certainly look at that. That's Survival International, Linda Pop.
Africa is changing, and the world is paying attention. This March, Channel Africa invites you to be part of a new conversation. Africa Matters, a platform where experts, policymakers, and thought leaders come together to unpack the big issues of our time: technology, politics, economics, climate change, and the future of our people. This is where ideas meet action, where change becomes opportunity, where Africa's voice takes its rightful place on the global stage. In March 2026, Channel Africa hosts Africa Climate Change Recovery Summit. Join the dialogue. Be part of the movement. Channel Africa, the African perspective. At the forefront, the most pressing issues on Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla. Channel Africa.
South African consumers can breathe a sigh of relief as inflation eases from 3.5% in January to 3% in February. However, analysts say the positive momentum in the form of low prices is expected to take a negative turn amid the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. The latest data released by Statistics South Africa shows that contributions to the 3% annual consumer price inflation rate came from housing and utilities, food and non-alcoholic beverages, as well as insurance and financial services. This latest print brings the inflation rate in line with the Reserve Bank's 3% inflation target. SABC economics reporter Naledi Mabitsela Ngobo has this report.
The latest inflation data released by Stats SA has not accounted for the Middle East war and still indicates a moderating food inflation path underpinned by ample domestic grain, fruit and vegetable supplies. The data shows that the annual rate for food and non-alcoholic beverages declined to 3.7% in February from 4.4% in January. Stats SA's Patrick Kelly also attributes the lower inflation rate to delayed medical aid rates.
This February's monthly print was lower than average for the month, and we attribute this to three main factors. First, there was a delay in the implementation of some new medical aid rates. Most medical schemes increase prices at the beginning of each year and are surveyed by Stats SA in February. This results in higher than average monthly rates. In February 2026, however, not all medical schemes had adjusted their contributions. This delay resulted in a lower monthly change in the CPI than might otherwise have been the case.
Chief economist at Agbiz, Wandile Sihlobo, says the favorable rain conditions boosted grain harvest, while the easing of meat prices from 13.5% in January to 12.2% in February is encouraging.
On a meat side is something that we always worry about, especially with the foot and mouth disease that is underway. But of course, the slaughtering hasn't stopped. We are still encouraged with the slaughtering figures that we are seeing across South Africa. And we hope that as the year continues, the slaughtering will hold up. The other positive, at least in food price inflation, which is the rate at which food prices are increasing, is that there will be base effects, which may support the slowing in the second half of the year of meat price inflation. So overall, the picture looks favorable. But there is one factor, though, that may disrupt this moderating path, and that is the fuel prices.
Independent economist Elise Kruger says with the US, Israeli and Iran war pushing up the price of Brent crude oil, inflation is expected to rise to around 4.5% by April on the back of imminently higher fuel prices.
Inflation will in April most probably spike towards about 4.5% once we get the significant spikes in petrol and diesel. Depending on the actual outcome, those could be as bad as 6 Rand to the litre for petrol and about 10 Rand for diesel if the current levels of oil and Rand prevails for the remaining trading days of March. That will unfortunately, be a significant shock to the economy in the sense that companies won't be able to absorb this cost. So it will most probably result in a second round effect on inflation, i.e. that a broader number of items will see price increases as a result of the higher fuel cost, most notably on the food price side.
Analysts say the Reserve Bank is unlikely to increase interest rates given the moderate inflation outlook, while the war is also expected to be short-lived, therefore having a temporary impact on inflation. I'm Naledi Mabitsela Ngobo in Johannesburg.
Africa World Hour. Africa World Hour. Unpacking global headlines from an African perspective.
Just rounding off the program at just about 12 minutes to 10, we look at this. The Confederation of African Football's Appeals Board has overturned the result of the 2025 Africa Cup of Nations final. It stripped Senegal of its title and awarded a 3-0 default victory to the host nation, Morocco. The decision stems from a 17-minute walk-off by Senegalese players during the final on the 18th of January 2026 in Rabat. Senegal had originally won the match 1-0 in extra time after returning to the pitch following their protest of a controversial stoppage time penalty awarded to Morocco. Let's talk about this decision. How did it come about? What does it mean? We on the line to Far Post editor Mthokozisi Dube. Mthokozisi, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for speaking to us. I know a lot of people's hearts stopped. People stopped breathing. I think there's some who are still not breathing at the moment. How did we go from Dakar to Rabat, from the pitch to the boardroom?
Hey, yeah, like I'm
yeah,
I'm
also
still
speechless.
trying to process it. It's quite shocking. I mean, I've never heard of this before. It's shocking, because you go back to the rules of the game. The referee on the night, after 15 minutes of the walkout, could have said, blown his whistle and said, Senegal has forfeited the match. Morocco has won the game 3-0. Trophy presented to Morocco, we move on. We wouldn't be here today. No one, Senegal were not going to go and appeal or anything of that sort because it was clear. I mean, you even go back to the decisions that they were not happy with. The goal that Senegal felt they had scored was not a goal. There was a clear foul. The foul they committed, which resulted in the penalty, which caused the walkout, was a clear penalty, So they had no leg to stand. But the fact that the referee allowed the game to go on until the final whistle changes everything. It then triggers law number 5.2, which says that the referee's decision on anything on the field is final. So yeah, it's just shocking that we are where we are.
So towards this, I mean, often, especially with soccer players, there's the letter of the law and then there's the spirit of the game. And that sometimes tends to confuse people, especially even how they judge a referee's decision. So in this case, what could have happened? Because what Senegal is saying now is saying, no, we actually think that there's corruption. This is why Morocco was given, the cup. So what happened in your mind?
Look, I think everything, has to go back to the night of the final. I mean, obviously the referee is thinking to salvage the image of African football. If this match is called off now, and it was not gonna give a good picture of the African game. Yes, that has happened, but Morocco also, they play the game. The game comes to an end. After the game, they appeal, and the DC then says no, the result stands, but Senegal are gonna be fined. So will Morocco be fined, for both their transgressions. But the result stands because the football match was played to the end, right? Fair enough, but Morocco says that we're not happy. Then they go to the appeals board and say they are not happy. And the appeals board obviously looks at things, differently from the way the CAF DC had looked at things, and they come up with a different verdict, which basically.
So let me stop you there, Mthokozisi. So what would have been the difference between the two?
There shouldn't be a difference because the same laws should apply. They are using the same rule book, so there shouldn't be a difference. Which is perhaps why Senegal would then allege that there is influence, from elsewhere, which would be reckless for us at this point because we don't really know, But I think the beautiful thing is that Senegal, still can go to the court of arbitration, for sports, and they will definitely get reprieve there. And I can bet you the CAS is going to restore Senegal is the African champions, I can bet you with my last cent that they definitely will.
But why do
will
you think
uphold
it would win an appeal, especially given from the beginning you said that it was a clear matter, that final whistle had blown and Senegal had lost. The game was awarded to Morocco, should have been awarded to Morocco. So what would be the different interpretation? And this comes at a time when there are lots of questions around CAF, its credibility and its governance.
Look, I think that the difference would be the fact that the game actually continued, right? And was played until the final whistle. After 2 sets of 15 minutes of extra time, the game was then decided on the field of play by a goal that Senegal scored, right? So that then says the decision of the referee, on the on-field decision of the referee should stand because the game was played to the end. If Morocco had refused to play, which would have been, they would have been right to say, listen, the law says that after 15 minutes, they forfeited the game, But the fact that they went back on the pitch, they missed the penalty, they played those 2 sets of 15 minutes, the game, the referee blew the whistle at the end of the game. For me, it changes everything. For me, that is where Senegal will still win, this case.
Do you foresee this? Firstly, do you believe this is an unprecedented event and one that could force reforms between the CAS and the CAF in their interpretation of the rules?
No. I mean, this has happened before. This is not the first time. In 2019, there was a case between Esperance in the CAF Champions League. Esperance versus Wydad, a Moroccan team in Tunisia. Wydad had a goal disallowed. They walked off the pitch. They left. And the referee, after an hour, declared Esperance the winners of that game, right? The CAF Exco came back and said, no, the match must be replayed. But Esperance took the case to CAS, and CAS said, you've got to respect your own rules. And they declared Esperance 3-0 winners of that game. So this is not the first time, that it. And I think it's good enough as is that Senegal is still able to go to the Court of Arbitration for Sports. I think it still works perfectly. No one needs to align with anyone. I think it's just important that cases independent. They'll be able to look at the laws and interpret them, and then
But that's what I'm trying to
rulings.
understand. Is it a case of ketile, so live with it? Because you mentioned that the rules are the same. Why is there a different interpretation between the CAS and the CAF?
So I think, sometimes you get the sense that the law has not been applied correctly, right? But you have a higher body that can actually review the application of that particular law and give its ruling. It happens that's why you even, in outside sport, one can actually go as far as the Supreme Court, can go as far as the Constitutional Court. The laws don't change, but it's the application of the laws that is reviewed, and a different outcome could come. You and I are looking at this thing. I'm not even a lawyer, but I can tell you that the law has wrongly been applied here, by the appeals board. And I can bet you on this one that the Court of Arbitration for Sports will have a different ruling.
Okay.
We'll be back here a few months, probably in the next 5-6 months, and we'll be back here and we'll have this conversation because CAS will have a different, application of the laws that the appeals board would have gotten wrong, in my opinion.
Quick and a final question, Thokozisi. How do you think this is impacting on the players on both sides?
Look, I think for a player who's won the cup, the Senegalese, I've seen some of their tweets. I've seen Ilman Diane of Ndiaye of Everton, tweeted and said, "Come and get, the trophy. Come and get the medal." You can see it obviously impacts, the African game negatively. But I think one thing that we should note is to be able to separate, between the quality of football that we saw that these players came and displayed. I mean, this decision is beyond them. It has nothing to do with them. They showed up. They gave us an entertaining tournament. I mean, I literally went to every venue, enjoyed the football. So I think it's important for us to be able to separate. These are administrative issues, but they have nothing to do with the the quality of play and what was displayed on the field of play. So I think we must constantly remind ourselves of how beautiful the African game is.
Mthokozisi, thank you so much. Mthokozisi Dube is Far Post editor, just speaking to us about this decision to take away the CAF Cup from Senegal and give it to Morocco. It's been said to be a baffling decision by some. Shayla and Kumana in the studio with us to look at African diaries this Thursday. Hope there's nothing baffling you.
No, actually, exciting news. We are seeing that online tutoring is booming at an expected growth of 12% annually. This is from 2024, I think, through to 2030. Right, and so we're going to be speaking to success story. This is, or rather, these are the founders of the Turning Point. And so we have an opportunity to speak to Tanya McCarthy, who will be joining us just to talk about her offering. She started off with 4 tutors and I believe just under 10 students. Now has 150 tutors with over 1,750 learners. So that's exciting. In the second hour of the show, we are going to be talking all things Frozen, the production, and how children who are going to be going into holidays very soon, is what I understand, can enjoy that play at the State Theatre.
It's so funny you say Frozen. I thought frozen yogurt.
Yo!
That's what my hot throat wouldn't mind right now. Anyway, Shayla, you enjoy the offering that you're bringing to us from us until the next time. It's good night.
Conversations that touch the heart and inspire change. Here on Africa